Do you ever find yourself spending time preparing for a new habit or project and you've got this really exciting plan? You can actually picture how this plan is going to change everything, or at least that's what I do all the time. I'll think to myself, okay, I finally figured it out. This time it's going to be so good. But that is not actually what happens. Maybe this doesn't feel familiar to you, in which case, teach me all your secrets, because this is a trap that I have fallen into a number of times. I'm going to share two examples of this and then tell you why I keep kind of stumbling into these mistakes and what I am actively trying to do now that I'm starting to see the pattern more and more, and I'm starting to learn what actually works. So, the first example is a personal one. This is at the start of 2024. So, in January of 2024, I was in Argentina and been there a month. So, we were just planning to return. I was missing home cooking, and I spent a few mornings on my trip devising a very elaborate 6-week meal plan. And I am talking planned it to the point where I wouldn't waste groceries. I created these lists so that I had all these different recipes. I linked all of the ingredients and I had it mapped out so that if I was using celery in one recipe, I would have another so that I'm just not wasting any food. I was very proud of myself for this, but I was also very excited at the idea of coming home from a trip, being away for a month, having grocery lists already made, 6 different grocery lists, and I would have all the different meals. And this was truly exciting. And I was picturing this very zen, calm, well prepared version of myself with all of these meals. As you could probably imagine, that's not really what happened. I probably made it about 2.5 weeks before things started to switch and change. And it kind of all fell apart. And I'll get into a little bit more about why after. But first, I want to share my other example, which is related to more professional around the fact that I carve out time every single Friday to do a weekly review. And a couple of years ago, I put together what I thought was sort of the ultimate weekly review template. Now, if you're not familiar, I use a tool called Notion, and Notion allows me to run a bunch of things in my business. So the advantage of this is I could set up this page that I could repeat each week. It was a recurring template that I could use. And I could actually embed things like see my active projects, see all of my tasks, maybe if something's overdue or not. And I had this beautifully set up in all these collapsing tabs, 6 different steps, made it pretty with colors so that it would be visually appealing. And then I proceeded to ignore most of it. Each Friday, I would start and I would definitely do the first part. I would get into the second part, maybe open the third, and then just give up. I was not doing it. And not only was I not following this plan, I was also feeling bad about myself. So they were really great in theory, but both of them ended up not working. They did not last. And essentially, what had happened is I had established a method, but I wasn't following it. I knew exactly what to do, and these were pretty comprehensive methods. I knew what to do, the skills to do it, I had the tools to be able to do it, and I knew when and where I was supposed to be doing it. So I had this complete method, but it was not working. And one of the problems was with the method itself. And that's what I want to talk about today of what is going on when you have a really clear method and you're not following it. And it's not a mindset thing. It's not necessarily about the mode or that it doesn't suit you. In both these cases, it suited me. But what I wasn't factoring in was this relationship between my ability to do it and my motivation. And we're going to get into what is the relationship and why are these kind of sophisticated or maybe comprehensive plans actually getting in the way? What was happening is I was expecting a very ambitious outcome designed for this ultimate version of myself that required more effort than I was necessarily willing to do on any given day. And the person I really like for this is BJ Fogg. If you're not familiar with BJ Fogg, so I've got the book here. It's usually on the shelf over my shoulder. So, Tiny Habits, and BJ Fogg is someone who writes about behavior change, teaches about behavior change. And I really like his model where he explains the different components that need to be present in order to take action. And I do have a visual if you are here on the video recording, but if you're just listening audio, I'll have it in my show notes so you can actually see what the visual looks like. But in essence, with his model, he's saying that in order to take a behavior, You need to have the appropriate level of motivation, the ability to do it, and also there needs to be some sort of prompt for you to do it. So let's start with the idea of motivation. You can vary on any given day or context and motivation. So your motivation can be high or your motivation can be low to take action. Then you also have ability. So you can have a high ability to do something, so it's really easy to do, or your ability to do it can be lower, so it's a little bit harder to do. So this can range from how much effort is this going to take? And so is the ability, is it harder or a little bit easier to do? And then he has what he calls an action line. So this action line, think of it as a threshold that in order for me to take action, so if I'm prompted to take action, am I going to do it? This depends on the level of motivation and the level of ability. When they meet over this threshold, then you'll do it. So for example, if I am prompted to do something that actually does require some effort, so it's a little bit harder to do, and it's over here, so I'm just kind of drawing where it's a little bit harder to do, but I do have high motivation. If my motivation's high enough, I am over the threshold, and so it's going to happen. But that exact same task, it's the same effort, but on a day where I have lower motivation, I don't meet the threshold. So, in other words, I don't have enough motivation for the effort that's required, so I don't do it. Now, what we could do if you want to get over the threshold, you could potentially try to motivate yourself, so increase motivation, but I think we all know that's kind of tricky to do. So instead, what we should work on first is to make it easier to do. And this is where this idea of simplicity comes in, that if we can make something easier to do, we're more likely to do it even on days when we have really low motivation. Now, another way that you could think of this is that if something is difficult to do, you have a smaller sort of chance of crossing that threshold. But if you make something much easier to do, you sort of increase your odds that you're going to take action, that you're going to jump over this threshold and actually take action on the thing that you want to do. And so when you start to understand this relationship between your varying levels of motivation, because they are not the same day to day, and then you also think about how much effort is required, this is where we get the likelihood of taking action. And this is why I really like BJ Fogg's model when it comes to having the combination when you're prompted, do you have the right level of ability and motivation in order to take that action? So that the book, Tiny Habits, is all about making things a little bit easier. There are more parts to this, but that's a really important part of understanding what's going on. So when I look back at these two examples, it's very clear that I was expecting a really high level of effort. In other words, I needed to have high motivation in order to do it. So that meal plan of mine, even though I did a lot of work up front, it still required that I would go follow the grocery lists and then spend some time, usually on Sunday, prepping for the meals. And then I would also have to spend time during the week. It turns out a lot of those meals were ambitious, meaning they took a lot more time in the kitchen. And if I had a tiring day, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't really have other options because of how sort of strict I laid this out. And then with this weekly review, it was made for this ultimate version of myself. And I very rarely on a Friday when it came time to do it, I wasn't doing it. And so ever since then, I've been really trying to embrace this idea. I call it the simplicity principle, and it's inspired by Einstein. This whole idea is you want something as simple as possible, but no simpler. This really means stripping away a lot of the effort so that it's still effective. You're still going to make progress in the right direction, but you don't overload it with unnecessary parts, that you are doing enough so that you're moving forward, but you are not making it so that a lot of effort and a lot of motivation are required. Now, there is a real thing, which is being overly simple. If it's too simple, usually that means something is missing. So sometimes if it's too simple, you just might not have clarity. So you just don't actually know what to do next. So if I went to the grocery store and just decided, you know what, it's simple to just show up to the grocery store without a list and then just each night just decide what I'm going to have for dinner. Now, most of us know that dreaded question of, so what do you want to eat for dinner? Can just they can just like steal the soul out of you. And if you don't know if you have the ingredients, it's too simple. So having some structure, but not nearly as ambitious, was the middle zone that I needed to find. But the other is that sometimes if it's too simple, it might not even be effective. So let's take a separate example where you imagine a person who has been kind of dabbling on and off with jogging and they want to have a regular jogging habit to become more cardiovascularly fit. And they decide, okay, I'm gonna go 3 days a week and I've got my running shoes and I'll just run outside, rain or shine. That is simple, but what does that person do when it's time to actually go out for their jog? If they don't know how long they're going, maybe they don't know which route they're going on, maybe they don't know what speed they should be going, they're sort of just freewheeling it. And so there's a lack of clarity, but also there could be a lack of effectiveness because they don't really have any kind of plan. So even having just a really simple or fundamental plan can make a big difference. So we need to look at the plan and say, okay, I want it to be as simple as it can be, but not too simple. The other question that I really like to ask, which is similar, is this idea of what would it look like if it were easy? It still means that I am going to be making progress. I'm going to be moving forward in the direction I want to move. But what would it look like if it were easy? And sometimes just asking that question and reframing that way, we can typically come up with an answer. And that gets to the core of what are the things that I know I need to do? But when you ask what would it be easy, you also picture yourself, what could I do even on a low motivation day? How do I sort of meet that threshold so that I'm going to regularly take action? Now, there's a chance that you are thinking to yourself, okay, well, that sounds great, but does that mean that you should never create a plan that's a little bit more ambitious? And because I think sometimes those ambitious plans, they can give us a vision to aspire towards. But the way I think about it now is two approaches. One option is what I'm doing now with my weekly review, where I have a good, a better, and a best. Where good, sort of good enough, is low motivation day. Here's what you expect from yourself. Just fill out maybe these two sections. I've actually gone through and removed things that I was never doing, that I was skipping. But I do have some options in there that I know I'm not going to do every week. But if I'm feeling motivated, and I even started to update my template, and I'm still a work in progress, so maybe that's something I can share with folks later, is, are you feeling ambitious? And a question mark. And then I have a section that I can open if I'm feeling a little bit more ambitious. So that's one option, doing a good, better, best, where you are very realistic about your expectations and the fluctuation of your motivation. But the second is just start with good enough, the good enough principle, just start with good enough. And then you can always add later as needed. So it's sort of this idea of walk before you run. And that's actually what I'm doing with my current experiment. So last week, I shared that my current experiment is around Instagram, that I am trying to show up more often, make content on there regularly, share about my momentum formula and topics and concepts that I want to teach. And I shared about my goals last week. So this week, I want to talk a little bit about the method because I have been reflecting on this question of what would it look like if this were easy? And that's where I came up with my current method. Now, as a recap for anyone who may have forgotten, the method, I like to think of it in a few different ways, which is the method is what do you actually have to do? How do you do it? Meaning, what skills do you need to be able to do something? When and where are you going to do it? That's the implementation, the when and where, and also what tools are you going to use? Now, when it comes to Instagram, my method, I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, which is as the what to do, is create content every weekday. I am not doing it on weekends. I want to have some boundaries when it comes to making content. Focus mostly on reels where it's me talking to a camera because that's what I feel comfortable doing and I can make that quickly. I'll make a carousel if it makes sense. And then stories I can add in there, but really I'm pushing myself to put more into the feed. And that is mostly in the form of reels. The other part of my method is remembering to be camera ready enough. And that just means that I feel comfortable and confident enough that if I show up on camera, I feel good and I don't feel like, I just rolled out of bed or whatnot. And I know for some people, they can just show up no matter what. And I love that for them. Right now, it helps for me to feel a little bit camera ready. So that's just part of my method is to make sure that I feel presentable. The other is that I've actually blocked off, this is the when and where, blocked off a 1 hour window in my afternoons. And I don't always need a full hour. Sometimes I can put something together quicker than that, but by just allocating it and sort of expecting to hold that window once a day on the weekdays, that is the when and the where. And if you're thinking, why don't you batch content? That's a method. That is a method, and it works for some people, but doesn't really work well for me. And we'll get more into that next week when we talk a bit about mode and how I work best. But so far, I have found just making kind of focusing on one piece of content. If I feel inspired to make more than one, cool. But I am not expecting it for myself. The other thing I am trying to do, and this is related to the tools, is I'm just using, let's go back to a main camera here for a second, is that I'm just using my phone and it's on a little tripod that I can put on my desk. And I also have a little wireless microphone that I can clip. The idea here is not overproduced, just have my wireless mic and my camera, record on the phone if I'm making a reel from scratch. If I want to have a clip from, say, a podcast episode, that I can export the clip. And that I would use the tool DaVinci Resolve because that's what I do to trim my podcast. And while I have that open, I can actually just highlight a section of the video and just export that clip. Then I'll still use the Instagram app or the Edits app to add in captions. So I'm just using the tools that Instagram provides to keep this as simple as possible. And then the other part is that when it comes to topic generation, as much as I love to plan in advance, I am also just trying to put in the reps, just show up regularly. So I'm not putting a lot of pressure that I have to follow some sort of content plan. Right now, it's making content, talking about topics that are on my mind. What am I thinking about this week? Maybe what I'm having conversations with people about this week. And it also likely I'll talk a little bit about whatever my topic is for the podcast episode for that week. But I'm not pushing myself into some sort of elaborate 12 or 16 week content plan where I talk about all these different topics. I'm really just trying to embrace putting in the reps. Now, the one other thing that I'll say that it's connected to the method, but it's a little bit adjacent, is as I think about the skills required, I do want to learn things about Instagram. I want to learn the new features that have been released since I was actively on the app, which is like 4 years ago. So things have changed. So I'm trying to learn those, how to use them. I am paying attention to other accounts that make content that resonates with me, whether it's the style of content, maybe how they teach, how they show up. So I am trying to look for inspiration and keep an eye on that. And then I'm also starting to pay attention to friction. So are there things in this method that slow me down? Are there ways that I am getting tripped up? And I'm paying attention to that. If I can make an adjustment on the fly, great. If not, I'll sort of make a note of it so that I can keep looking at different ways to make my method a little bit more effective so that things will just flow. Because for the moment, I'm just showing up, trying to show up consistently so that I can get the practice in. It's not going to be perfect. I mean, it never is. We all know this, but just embracing showing up. I think I mentioned this last week, or maybe I said it on my Instagram story, is that right now, I actually appreciate that I'm doing this while I don't have a ton of views or reach because it's a great time to experiment. This is one of the benefits when you're new at something and you haven't necessarily spent a lot of time there, is that I don't have a massive audience on Instagram. And so it just allows me to feel more comfortable practicing something, putting out a reel that I was like, maybe this is so, let's just try it. So I'm in a bit of that experimentation phase right now. And that's all part of how I'm approaching this. What would it look like if it were easy is kind of that question I keep coming back to. The other thing is that I'm really interested if you're willing to share your own stories. If you have examples of when you have made something simpler and made you more likely to do it, I would love to be able to share some examples to everyone else on the podcast because when we hear different examples, I mean, I've shared my meal planning example, my weekly review example. I have many more, but I would like to hear from you too. Is there something you have made easier and so you're doing it now and you can always get better and add on later, but I'd love to hear that so I can share so other people can feel inspired and maybe take some ideas from you. And one of the things I want to encourage you to do today is to take a look at maybe a habit or a project that you've been struggling with. maybe you just haven't been consistent or you kind of started and stopped or stalled, and just ask that question. What would it look like if this were easy? Make a few adjustments so that you can find and keep your momentum, no matter what your level of motivation is that day.